Good evening, all. And with this poem, I welcome you tonight. The Guest House by Rumi. This, being human, is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I am Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests sometimes and an open mic always. We may still not be at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, but since the pandemic, we have transitioned to this virtual space. And I'm so grateful this allows us to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. Thanks everyone for this support and for Zooming in. It would be lovely to know where you are joining us from tonight. So please share in the chat. When I think of this evening, I feel each new season comes with the promise of new hope and joy. But for many, the seasons of stress and pain continue. How do we restore the calm? How do we find healing and comfort in the face of any struggle? Through poetry, let us pause today and find glimmers of light, even in our darker days, and search for ways to reflect on gratitude, as we also share in the November festivities like Diwali, Hanukkah, Día De Los Muertos, and Thanksgiving that instill feelings of joy, optimism, and graciousness. With this, I invite you all to our restorative night of poetry. And it is my pleasure to welcome our ever graceful and brilliant featured reader for tonight, Phyllis Klein. Let me share about Phyllis. Phyllis Klein is a psychotherapist and poet from the San Francisco Bay Area. Her work has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including Chiron Review, Sweet, Three Elements, I-70 and the Minnesota Review, and Gyroscope Review, among many others. She was a finalist in the Sweet Poetry Contest 2017, the Carolyn Forsch Humanitarian Poetry Contest 2019, and the Fisher Prize 2019. She's been nominated for multiple Pushcart Prizes. Her new book, The Full Moon Herald, from Grayson Books, is a newspaper of poetry and has won honorable mention in poetry for the Eric Hoffer Book Award 2021. She loves to cook using farm fresh vegetables. During the pandemic, she has taken up exercising with YouTube and starting a reading called Poets in Conversation. Thank you for joining us tonight, Phyllis. What a delight to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica. And what I want to say is, when you asked me to focus this reading on how poetry is healing, it was so exciting for me. It's such a topic that is so dear to me in many, many different ways. And so I thought I would begin by telling you that I asked a number of my really wonderful poetry friends from all over the country um, to write to me about how they think poetry is healing. And along the way, Monica, you did the same thing. And so we have a number of quotations from friends and fellow poets that we'll be giving to everyone at the end of this reading. And through the reading, I'll be reading some, and perhaps Monica, you'll be reading some as well. So I crystallized my ideas about this. And here's the list that I came up with. So how is poetry healing? I think first and foremost, it helps you feel less alone. It connects you to your unconscious. So when you're writing, you can learn how to let your pen lead you. And when you're reading, you can follow the wonder that the poem may open for you. Writing poetry can actually help you manage your physical and emotional pain by getting it out of your body and onto a page. And the rhythm, music, compaction, the sounds of poetry link our senses, helping us get grounded and calmer. And also, we can actually connect through our heartbeat and other rhythms that we have in our bodies and our psyches. And as I'm going through this list, you may find some of these resonate for you, some of them don't. And throughout, when we get to the open mic, we'd like it. We'd really like it if you could also say something about how poetry is healing for you, just if you want to. So the next thing that I came up with is that poetry helps us feel empathy. Feel empathy for yourself first, and then for others. And it's the feeling of being in another person's shoes. It's an emotion that comes up sometimes if you're reading a poem or as you're writing a poem. It might help you cry or feel angry if you need to, or if you're feeling angry, to have an outlet for it. And it might give you some hope. The next thing is, for me, and maybe for many of you, it gives us something to do. So if you're feeling helpless, if you're feeling completely out of power, and I know we've all been feeling that way a lot in the last number of years, writing in general, and for me, poetry, it helps us to do something, to have a way to hold something on the page that might feel almost unbearable. It could be a death, an illness, a disturbance, something in the news. Poetry also, it can help you develop your authentic voice and speak your truth. That's a very, very important one for me. Now, some people actually tell it slant when it comes to poetry, so they're not necessarily saying everything that's true, or you can actually make things up. It's fiction. So all of that is just fine. And actually also finding things that are fun or funny. So developing your sense of humor, that's also very healing. So for me, the authenticity has been extremely therapeutic for me in my poetry. So also, sometimes you can find a line, a phrase, or an image that stays with you, that you continue to think about, or it continues to be with you. And if it gives you goosebumps or shivers, that's always a really good sign. So when Monica read Rumi's poem, The Guest House, with its opening line, "This being human is a guest house," if you know that poem, you might be thinking about the sorrows sweeping out the house, or other lines in the poem that really resonate for you. And I actually use this if I am having trouble sleeping. Sometimes before I go to bed, I'll read a poem or I'll think about an image that I either wrote or someone else wrote that I want to take with me and kind of just have in my mind. That's really a beautiful way to experience the healing power of poetry. So getting back to the lines that we're talking about, like the guest house, there's a reason why these lines are so well known. They take you somewhere that you need to go. And these are the kind of lines that we often write about in the chat on Zoom readings. So that's the list that I have. You may have more to add to this list, and we'd love for you to speak about it during the open mic, as I said before. Monica, I don't know if there's anything more you want to say, or shall I read my first poem?
Yeah, Phyllis. So, I mean, I completely connect to all that you said, and just like you said, I think it's wonderful the quotes that all of us gathered, asking all the poets across California and around America, and it was wonderful to know as the quotes started coming in, how all of us in some ways think in such a similar way, whether we are into making poetry or whether we are writing and reading and listening to poetry. And there are a couple of quotes that I would like to share as well. This one is from Eileen Casineto. She's the San Mateo County Poet Laureate, the current Poet Laureate. And she said, writing poetry is healing for me because it helps me slow down and look beyond the surface of things. It reveals possibilities and ways of reimagining the future. And it's so true, right? Like Phyllis said, that you can make things up as well, but and in some ways we are reimagining the future by writing things that we would like to see in the future, or writing about things that we find comfort in. And there is another quote here in that regard I'd like to share from our Petaluma poet, Sandra Ann Fang. She's also with us tonight in the audience and will be reading for the open mic. And she says, writing poetry is healing for me because it acts as a container to hold whatever I'm thinking and feeling. It's a personal therapist that I carry in my back pocket. No topic is off limits. Writing is a quest and an exploration whose destination remains unknown to me until the poem is complete. It may take several revisions to arrive at the conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion reveals itself as yet another question. As a poetry teacher, I present writing in a similar light. I urge my students to explore their shadowy places as well as their sunny corners. And that's such a beautiful thing to say, Sandy. Thank you so much for sharing your words and thoughts. And I feel that in some ways, it's wonderful to share this joy and solace that we find within poetry as a teacher or as a maker or a reader and listener of literature of any kind as such. But poetry with the brevity, I think, that it offers in that one window that you open up, and the joy that it brings in, or the calm that it brings in, I think that matters a lot. So well said, Phyllis, on that note. And I'd love to hear a poem from you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for reading those, both really beautiful. And I'll be reading some quotes from some friends of mine interspersed in between my poems. So, and then we have the beautiful documents that Monica put together to take with us. So the first poem that I decided to read is a memorial poem. It's the title, I'll just start reading it. During the purple tear surge, Bill brought his Thanksgiving port cranberry relish again. Its clamp lidded glass jar, its color of cinnabar, gift of considerable kitchen effort. This year, he was too weak to stir the ingredients into their elixir of wine, raisin, berry, sugar majesty. Almost too weak to exit his car's passenger seat, definitely unable to hand us the jar, stooped as he was like a very large, faded, wind-up doll, power source dissipating. And even conversation impossible with masks on. This tradition, who can imagine its end? This slowing down into the final descent. He says he has no pain. Hover of wings in search of a soft landing. And here's one of the quotes from my friend. Poetry unveils unconscious desires and questions that need to be resolved and helps me begin to address them, or to hold two opposing ideas or questions in the same space, even though they will never be totally resolved. And I just think all of these ideas coming together, it's really beautiful. So here's my next poem. It's a memorial poem. It's a very different memorial poem. In the empire of the invisible, where the dead go, where the moon lives in a private sky of exhales, coyote shadow wails. In the commonwealth of death, people's ages go back to beginnings as anniversaries of decease, like my mother, who went from 98 to 1 year since receiving her passport. She didn't want to lose control, had already traveled from house to condo to assisted living to skilled nursing care. She separated from her body, passed through the nation state of her dominion over me, into a tunnel headed out of any town where sun has expired. And if there are stars, they might flicker as if in a fog, mole spirits peeking from their burrows. Since my mother died, I have rejuvenated. I see rose pinks, lettuce greens, iris lavenders, hear them growing. My eyes no longer stalked by dread. My chest opens its lace curtains. Since she went invisible, I can bear her wrangled shadows, her bouquets of thorns bloomed with dragon-fired opals. In the realm of my 70s, I feel a rebirth. Even as life snakes toward departure, my own span of years ruled by mystery uncharted. When I close my eyes, I can see more than blank space. I can see breezes, gravity, orbit. Thank you. So, Monica, yeah, let's take a break and perhaps we could talk a little bit about those two poems, if you'd like.
Absolutely, Phyllis, and such exquisite crafting. These
you.
poems, I feel, I mean, although they are heavy with emotions, there's a certain lightness to them. And through the vulnerability they express and the feeling of letting go that we hear in the speaker's voice, they seem to have an instant connect with the most innate feelings we all commonly relate to. And through poetry, I feel we experience collective grief as well as solace. So since this writing is so intimate in both your poems, I wanted to know, how did these poems help you with the grief you were feeling in each situation?
Mhm. So the first poem is much more straightforward than the second one. It's clearly a tribute to a dear friend, and a huge loss. And it was shared with his family, so that gave me a lot of healing. It gave my partner Len and I a chance to feel connected around this loss. And and the imagery in the poem too, it helped me to feel close to this man that we loved so much, and the tradition that he had of bringing this port cranberry relish every year for maybe 30 years, and he did that for at least 20 people, and then he'd come back at Christmas with cookies or quick bread, and sit and talk. And so we miss him very, very much this year. So the other poem is a lot more complicated, as you can tell from hearing it. And I think for me so the healing part of it is, first of all, sitting with myself, um, to be able to think about how I was feeling. And I've been chronicling the experience of losing my mother since the day that she died. I started writing about it. And it's been very, very important to me. And I know I'm not alone in doing that. I think many people do that. And it is really a journey of self-discovery. And when you sit, as you were saying in one of the quotes, Monica, that you read, one of the beautiful quotes, I didn't really know where this poem was going to lead me. And so it took a risk. It took a risk. I was quite authentic to myself. And what I find really healing also is that no one needs to really talk to me about what this poem means. It's more about, and people don't usually ask, it's more about reading it. I feel a sense of connection, and it feels just really very, very healing just to read it without having to talk about it much at all. I feel understood and supported. And that is very, very powerful. So thank you for
Absolutely.
asking that. Yeah.
No, absolutely, Phyllis. That does make a whole lot of sense. And what you were just saying, I was just wondering, uh, the writing process, is it mainly for us, the poet, the maker, or is it also intended for someone else to read when you're writing? Do you feel that? I mean, I received a quote from one of our local poets
Mm-hmm.
from Brisbane. His name is Tony Press,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Writing poetry is healing for me because when I write, I am truly writing to myself. I am the intended audience. It becomes a bonus when the words connect with
Yes.
others too." So I was just wondering that,
Yes.
do you feel that connection in some way, or do you write for that connection to build that bridge between yourself and others?
Yeah. When I read that quote, when you sent that to me, I thought, oh yeah, I could have said that. I wish I had said that too, because I really totally agree with that. The writing is for first and foremost for yourself. Um, and the sharing of it is later. Um, and so if you're writing it, if you start off writing it for someone else or for your intended audience, or, we're all trying to write really good poetry, or, feel really really proud of our words and our craft. But for me, especially with the idea of a healing poem, it's coming from such a personal and deeply internal space, and it's really about self-knowledge and almost, not almost, it's kind of for me like an altered state of mind that I go into as I'm trying to figure out what I want to say, and often really a surprise where I end up. And then the bonus, yes, if it gets to a point, and some poetry is too much of a risk, I wouldn't be sharing it yet, maybe not ever, maybe some I will at some point, but yeah, but when it does feel right to share it, then yes, that's the bonus. Yeah. And that's the connection with others that is also very, very healing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it does take a lot of courage to put yourself out there in this way. But thank you for sharing that, Phyllis, and would
Thank you.
love to hear some more from you.
Okay, yeah. So the next one, thanks, Monica. The next one is this is in response to a news story, and excuse me. I won't say much more about it until later. To know a monarch, to know it only as a photograph, a memory, never to witness again a community of millions clustered on eucalyptus branches now empty. These fragile slivers of stained glass, no longer clinging to winter respites. What is a world that would allow this extravagant pollinator to die off? This migrational miracle. Rumi says, "You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life?" I want a humanity that weeps copiously for this animal who starts off in a crawl, shows us how to fly. I want processions, dirges everywhere, want to howl over milkweed, bereft without purpose. So much loss. I want to rend my garments, burn kaleidoscopes of butterflies into my skin. What good would that do? Or I could slice open the sky so their ghosts torrent down. What do I know of softness? My origins in an ice house, in a tradition of cruelty, of aberration, torn appendages. Where are the wings for this? Where the flashes of orange slipped through our fingers? And here's another quote from a friend. If poetry is healing, it is because it both allows me to understand and process my experiences, and also because writing from others shows me what is universal. I feel like I am not alone when I see something written about by someone else. So this next poem is called Try Not to Be Afraid of This Drought. And there's an epigraph from an interview. So this was spoken by the great poet Ocean Vuong. And he says, the only place I have to hide is inside my poems. So many clouds and the feeling of rain, but nothing pours. Everything shrivels. So dry, the earth begs the sky to squeeze a few drops out of its mouth. So dry, trees gasp, roots split into parched cracks. We hide thirsty inside this poem, only words to drink. Inside this poem, all the fear in the world and all that we lose. Then the oranges, juice dripping, and pomegranates, wild red seeds staining. Their tree roots beseech the subterranean lake. So deep, find me, sunken under, water me. So much I've lost under my skin, down in the secret parts of me. Some things no return, but to come, the smell of rain, the rain itself, the tears. So, yeah, would you like to have another little conversation, Monica?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, those were just remarkable poems that you just
Thank
shared. And
you.
um, what do I say? It's, I mean, the one that you just read, it's particularly since we are going through a drought that we are currently experiencing. I think it speaks to that so much.
Exactly.
And I was thinking even while you were reading To Know a Monarch, the previous poem that you just read, there is so much light that I feel the imagery holds a lot of light in both these poems.
Mm.
And poetry can bring such sunlight and rain to parched minds. We often equate the need to heal and restore something inside of us. And that is what you're doing through the connections and the images that you're bringing in. But through this poem of yours, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the healing we are looking to happen is for the outside, with climate change affecting the world,
Mhm.
politics and socioeconomic news,
Mhm.
since you also write poems that are related with the news and with current affairs.
Mhm.
We often mourn the loss of nature and of culture. So, with this in mind, when the situation is not in our control, and like you mentioned that through your poem, there is a sense of powerlessness that comes in, and
Mhm.
we may not be in a position to resolve the larger issues. And we often tend to worry about the present and imagine a difficult future. So in such times, I feel poetry can help us to return to the familiar and restore calm in some ways. And both the poems that you just read are very different. So how was each one healing for you when you wrote it and also when you were
Mm.
reading it?
Uh, well, the first one about the monarchs, that one, it felt really important to write about that, and it was feeling completely the feeling of just a loss of power, and so putting it down on the page uh, um, to contain the feelings and to feel like, okay, I can't do anything about this. I really can't do that much, but I can at least write something about it. And it's that isn't doing that much either, but it does feel like at least something. And then reading it and sharing it with others. In this case, that is really helpful and really, really important. And what you said, Monica, about the images, I think that really helps too. Trying to find the right images, and just to briefly say that I was in a group with a wonderful teacher, and she had this one. She had a chapter. One of the lessons was called "The Broken Body," and I brought this poem in, and I thought it was very dark. And she said, "Oh, no, no, you need to break it more, break it more." So bring in even more dramatic expressions of images, like the tattoos, like the slicing open the sky. Those are the things that we connect with, and somehow this brings us. I don't know if I can explain it exactly. It brings some kind of feeling of I did something. I expressed it in the best way that I could. And then the other poem, yeah, I wrote this several years ago, so it's unfortunately, it's still very timely. And for me, this was one that I really didn't know where it was going to go. So it was definitely about the drought. It was about connecting with that quote. And I don't know if how many of you in the audience find a quote that you want to write from, or read a poem before you start writing, or have something in mind that as a prompt. I do that often. So in this case, I was really intrigued by this idea of hiding inside a poem that really meant it spoke to me. And then when it got to the end, and I realized that I was going to be talking about my own internal drought, that was really quite a surprise, and that again was very healing for me. There's therapy in that.
Absolutely, that's so true. It also takes me back to another quote that I'd like to share, and it's from Pescadero poet Veronica Kornberg. I guess she's also in the audience with us
Yeah,
today.
she is.
Great. And she says, writing poetry is healing for me because it connects me to other people. Is there anything more painful than feeling alone in the world?
Mm.
Poetry is a direct electric connection between my heart and yours. There is magic in poetry, transporting us across time and distance, culture and history. It is a mystical mirror, allowing us to see deeply who we are or who we might wish to become.
Mm.
In a poem, I can laugh with you, grieve with you, celebrate, expand. I can find you. Poetry is the room where it all happens.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. Just beautiful.
Yeah, that is so amazing.
Mm. Yes. So I have one more poem to read. And this one was meant to be soothing and to taste good. End with it to bring us to a slightly more pleasing ending, not to leave us in the depths of depression. And I hope that it for me it brought a feeling of peace and grounding. But even so, I think it's very important to include a challenge and difficulty, even in the poems that we are feeling very happy about, because those two things push against each other, and that tension is really, really helpful for healing and for bringing us into a more of a grounded, realistic idea. So the poem is called Incantation. The code of a poet is patchworked, warm, full enough to fit everyone inside. We rest together in its tent of permissions and omissions, admissions, intuitions, Paisley confessions. This inviolate space, this human errored space, we are fledglings huddled in its skyscrapered air, smell of planets, of earth musk. Listen to the banter of spring as she loosens her leaf-felted robes. Birds flicker all around. Moles dig in. Beneath this coat, we eat chocolate dipped in more chocolate. Sweetness spills, drops of honey fold into spiced tea to soothe our plaid misfortunes. The coat of a poet has seams for fears, tears, for blisses, kisses of silk on skin. It breezes smoke out of pockets and into a glossy night. When we sleep, it's a love or a friend rests on a hook. If sleep is outside the window, it's our weighted blanket. Morning comes, wearing woolly sunlight lightly around its shoulders. Thank you very much.
That was beautiful, Phyllis. Thank you so much. Incantation. Couldn't get any better than that. And I think, I mean, I wouldn't want to end this conversation. Your tenderly woven words have been a balm this evening, and your poetry speaks to a deeper part of the self and becomes a doorway to healing. And I'm so grateful for this gift you hold as a poet to nurture us through words. I feel truly nourished tonight. Thank you very much. And I will open the floor up briefly for questions and comments before we close this segment and end the featured section recording. So please, if anyone would like to, if anyone has any questions or comments, you can unmute yourself and go right ahead.
I just wanted to thank you both for your wonderful words, you especially, Phyllis, but Monica, you as well. I mean, everything that we've heard, the messages that we've heard, both within the poetry and within the quotes from other poets. I mean, I think they probably all speak to all of us. There are so many ways and times and influences that bring us to poetry. And I think this kind of spoke to all of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Phyllis, I want to thank you especially for your monarch poem. I planted milkweed in my front yard this year, and just about a few days ago, there was still a monarch at my milkweed plant.
Wonderful.
And I can't believe that I saw a monarch in front of my house in November.
Yeah, that is really exciting news.
It is just so exciting. And for those of you who haven't planted milkweed, I'm a milkweed evangelist. Plant milkweed.
Okay.
Okay,
All right.
although they say it shouldn't be planted if it's closer than 5 miles to the coast. And these are the experts saying this, and yes, it will draw monarchs, but there are other considerations. From what I know, monarch population is up over the 2000
It is.
last year, so that's good.
Yeah, and
That is good.
there's residential monarchs and there are migrating monarchs. And the monarch that was in front of my house is a residential one because it doesn't go far from the neighborhood.
Well, I hope my poem is totally wrong. I'd love for my poem to be completely, proven wrong.
Thank you for running it.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And before I close the recording, I would like to share one more quote, and it's from the first Poet Laureate of San Mateo County, Caroline Goodwin. And she says, "Writing poetry is healing for me because it brings me back to beginner's mind. When I sit down at the page, I am just not sure what will happen. That is exciting and keeps me connected to the mysteries around me, to my higher self, and to other poets, both living and gone." So I think this one is a special quote for all the makers of poetry who connect to that feeling of expressing themselves and sharing and putting those thoughts on paper.
And also the legacy of people who leave their poetry as gifts for us after they're gone. That's beautiful.
Absolutely, that's so true. And I have shared Phyllis Klein's a book, the link to her book, Full Moon Herald, in the chat. So all of you can check that out. It's an amazing book to own. I own it and I just love reading it every single time. And thank you everyone for being here. This has been so wonderful, and I hope everyone enjoyed this restorative night of poetry. We are going to stop recording now. So those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To all our listeners who might find us on YouTube later, thanks for joining us for the virtual Belmont Poetry Night. And here's wishing everyone a warm and safe holiday season. Good night.